the way I kept myself going was saying, oh, it's okay, I'll kill myself in 6 months. It said to me, it goes, from now on, you will never, your biggest issue that's holding you back is your suicidal thoughts and your self-hatred. And tonight, that's gone. It's never going to come back. We're getting rid of that for good. And that's it. That's gone. You know, that's never been back. It's 4.5 years now.
Has the answer to our mental health and addiction epidemic been sitting under our noses the entire time? And have we become so blinded by the illegal classification of plant medicines that we've ignored the benefits that these medicines can bring? We're a society who tends to follow science, and the science is now overwhelming. That psychedelic mushrooms, or psilocybin mushrooms as they're known, can have huge benefits for people suffering with mental health problems such as depression and anxiety, as well as in other areas such as addiction and other mental and physical ailments. A psychedelic renaissance is well underway, and science is at the very forefront of it. And in this week's episode, we explore the healing power of psilocybin, or magic mushrooms, in helping people with mental health and other health challenges. Just to be really clear, we are not personally advocating that you go out and take plant medicines or use psilocybin mushrooms. But what we are doing is addressing the stigma associated with these medicines and trying to shine a light to help us as a society realise that these medicines have a place in helping us solve the mental health crisis that's currently sweeping over the Western world. If you're enjoying the content, there's a full back catalogue of health, well-being and self-growth videos available now that you can check out on our YouTube channel, so feel free to subscribe.
Psilocybin mushrooms, or magic mushrooms as they're better known, are outlawed here in the UK. They're illegal and currently widely classed as Schedule 1 and Class A drugs, putting them right up there with the likes of heroin and cocaine, despite the fact that they are in fact a natural fungi that have been used for healing for thousands of years, long before we had any lawmakers and long before the real drugs made by pharmaceutical companies came along. And here's the definition for Schedule 1 drugs. Drugs with a high potential for abuse, or drugs that have no recognised medical uses. Now we have an issue. Psilocybin does have recognised medical uses. In fact, these mushrooms have such a powerful effect on treating depression, anxiety, alcoholism and mental disorders that they are being heralded by some scientists as the future of psychiatric healthcare. We now have psychedelic research centres in London, in the US, and scientists are making some startling discoveries about the healing potential of psilocybin mushrooms. This is why we are beginning to see a radical shift in attitudes towards psilocybin mushrooms. At a time when there's a mental health epidemic in the Western world, could psilocybin mushrooms hold the key to solving our ever worsening mental health crisis? We absolutely believe so. It was around this time last year that I first became friends with a guy based at the other side of the world. His name's Paul Philippe and he's based in Melbourne, Australia. And I came into contact with Paul when I was working as a volunteer writer with the Thank You Plant Medicine movement. And Thank You Plant Medicine is a grassroots organisation that campaigns to reduce the stigma around plant medicines. And my job was to interview a variety of people from all over the world who had really powerful healing experiences with all sorts of plant medicines such as cannabis, iboga, ayahuasca and psilocybin mushrooms. We got in contact with Paul and he was willing to share his story because he had such a huge, profound life transformation using psilocybin mushrooms. And Paul's story is one where, as a child, he suffered the most unimaginable physical, mental and emotional child abuse. It was horrifying to hear what he went through as a child at the hands of his mother.
Instead of love and nurturing, Paul was constantly shown hatred and extreme violence. It led to Paul first trying to take his own life at the age of 7, then again as a teenager, and another attempt as an adult alcoholic barely surviving each day. Paul's level of emotional dysfunction and self-loathing was so extreme that he felt completely unlovable and had suicidal thoughts on a daily basis. But his mother was simply continuing all that she ever knew. She had been an unwanted, hated child as a result of her mother being raped. And she'd also been sexually abused by her stepfather during childhood. It was a tragic cycle of dysfunction that had cursed generations of Paul's family, and it was so close to destroying his life too. That was until Paul had an unexpected, profound spiritual and healing experience through psilocybin mushrooms. Paul's story might be upsetting for some to listen to at first, but we assure you that it has the most beautiful ending.
I was hospitalised for the first time when I was about 3 weeks old because I was crying. My mother didn't know how to stop me crying, so she picked me up and threw me against the wall. And, you know, from my understanding, obviously, it's, you know, what I was told by family members, but I spent a couple of weeks in hospital after that. You know, and then handed back to my mum. And, well, there was quite a lot of intense sort of physical, emotional abuse, you know, that went on through most of my childhood. You know, mum would attack me with anything she could get her hands on, you know, bits of wood, cords, cables, you know, whatever it may have been. And yeah, well, I mean, it's fair to say that she had quite serious anger issues, you know. But on the flip side of that, I never went without a meal. I never went without clothes on my back, and somehow, as screwed up as my mum was, I think it's almost a testament to her strength of the fact that she didn't kill me, and you know, that she was able to offer some form of stability. But her hatred towards me was obviously a reflection of her hatred towards herself, and then a hatred again towards her mother. You know, so we used to have like what I call like the programming sessions, you know, which I'm guessing when mum was you know, in her darkest places, where, you know, I'd sort of sit in the middle of the room or something, and, you know, she'd beat me, and then she'd repeat phrases, you know, like everyone hates you, you know, you should be dead. And I'd be forced to repeat, you know, those phrases. Everyone hates me, I should be dead, you know. No one could ever love me, you know, I'm a worthless piece of shit. It was like this constant programming that just went on and went on for years. I guess I really remember sort of sitting down and repeating those from maybe, I can remember as far back as 4, but maybe that happened even earlier. And you know, so as I grew up and with that sort of steady, constant stream of programming, it becomes ingrained. So you don't, I didn't even need my mother there to go into that default programming. So I could be doing something, I could be drawing a picture, I could be making something, you know, like nailing something together out of wood out the back, which I used to love. And anything would go wrong and it would just be instantly, I'm a fucking idiot, I can't do anything right, you know, I'm useless, no one wants me. It's no surprise this sort of thing happens, you know. So it become my self dialogue, it become my self mantras. You know, my dad tried. I mean, he'd try and pull my mum off me at times, you know, he'd try and calm her down. But my mum was, you know, probably like 6 foot, you know, at her biggest, probably around 120, 130 kilos. He did what he could, but he was, you know, he was the abused spouse as well. But then when I was 10, my dad was murdered at work. There was some poison put in the sugar. It wasn't a direct, this person had in mind to kill my dad. You know, he was a crazy guy, worked at a chemical plant, and so obviously that event threw my mum back into a, you know, well, probably the deepest level of a sort of, you know, depression and darkness that I remember ever seeing, where she'd just sit there for hours staring at the floor, not talking, you know, and being like 10, and I'd be like, are you okay, Mum? You know, what's wrong? And she, you know, when she would talk, she would just look at me and just give me this dark, deep, evil look and just be like, it should have been you who died. You know, I don't love you, I loved him. It should have been you who died. And that was sort of all I'd really hear from her for, you know, it felt like months that she was in that sort of deep state, you know. So I had to become a lot more self-reliant, and family members at that stage, obviously feeling for the depth of my mum's grief and having sympathy and compassion towards her, but their message to me was, oh no, well, your mum doesn't really mean that, she's just upset. If you were better behaved, your mum wouldn't be like that, you know. So there was also the family members that I looked to and spoke to about these situations, who again sort of compounded the you know, the beliefs and my self-understanding that these things, this was something wrong with me. I was the cause of all this, you know, which then creates sort of more loathing. And then Mum become sick, found out that she had cancer when I was 13 years old. And, you know, by the time they found it, it was right through her body. You know, so she went through chemo and it sort of all dragged out and she was quite sick, and it's going through a lot of pain. And then, you know, so I'd swing from being, you know, all children love their parents regardless of what they do to us. It's inbuilt into us. You know, so I love my mum, so I'd go through the flip sides of being so upset, seeing her so sick and being scared that anything was going to happen to her, to then laying in my bed at night feeling some sense of satisfaction to listening to her scream in pain, because I was able to hear her in pain, you know, that I felt. And then again, that sort of compounded things, because then I'm feeling guilty for feeling that, you know. So Mum died when I was 16, sort of out in the world by myself.
Rachel is a mum from Edinburgh who has struggled with depression in the past, and psilocybin mushrooms have been a big part of her healing journey.
So my journey was really the one from depression to happiness, and there's a lot of depression in my family on both sides, and alcohol problems as well, and I think that was just people trying to treat themselves from the symptoms of depression. So yeah, it's been quite a long journey. It started in 2014, I'd had quite a kind of low-level depression probably for a very long time, like since I was a teenager. I remember being not happy at school and having a bit of bullying at school, and then I went away travelling by myself for quite a while, and that was awesome. No depression whatsoever when I was doing that. Nobody knew what I was up to, no one had any opinions on it, had a great time. And then it kind of came back again when my marriage dissolved and I ended up being single mum to 2 little girls. Yeah, I had quite a lot of sadness in those times. And then my ex left the country as well, so I was really by myself. And then kind of stress at work. I worked for the NHS, so there was a lot of, in mental health, so there was a lot of kind of pull on my resources and didn't feel like very much filling me back up again. And then there was a big family bust up at a Christmas thing. Christmas, never unheard of for family problems, but we had quite a big one then. And then after that, I just really wasn't coping. I just went into quite a dark place. And I was approaching the age of 50 as well, which I think other people might relate to as quite a pivotal moment. When that's coming up, you kind of go, oh, I'm at least halfway through, you know, what have I done and where am I going and what's it all about? So my contract came to an end. I was working on contracts at that point, and I just thought, do you know what, I just don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to be this miserable. I'm going to put lots of effort into finding out a different way of doing things. And I've been to the doctor who, you know, was saying, you've got depression, I can give you some antidepressants, but I just knew for me that wasn't the right thing to do. I knew that would be, I'd be dealing with the symptoms but not with the cause, and I kind of wanted to really get to the cause of it. So I went looking, and I gave up my job and I just tried lots of different things. I picked up other work as well so I could pay the bills. And I tried all sorts of different things. I went for counselling, I went for hypnotherapy, I learned non-violent communication, which was really quite pivotal for me as well, because it's about learning what's going on inside of you. And I think until I understood that, how to communicate with myself even, you know, I was useless at communicating with other people. And like nobody in my family, I would say, are good communicators, so it was all a bit of a storm there. So that really helped me. I learned how to kind of give myself some self-empathy, and so I was getting a lot better. I was kind of getting my head above water. I wasn't feeling like I was drowning anymore. I had gone through a time where I really felt quite, I'd say, quite suicidal. I wasn't going to do it, you know, I had kids, but I considered it. So I got myself so that I was doing okay. But there still felt like there was some kind of dark thing inside me. There was some place that I hadn't reached. I felt like some part of me was bad or wrong, or, you know, that I wasn't wanted by my family. And then I saw a documentary on ayahuasca, and they say that ayahuasca calls you. And as soon as I heard about it, I was like, oh yeah, that's calling me.
The US and Canada are way ahead of the game with psilocybin. Denver, Colorado became the first city to decriminalise psilocybin in May 2019. The cities of Oakland and Santa Cruz in California followed suit, while Somerville in Massachusetts took the same progressive steps in January 2021. Meanwhile, with strong research being put forward by campaigners, Oregon went even further to become the first state to both decriminalise magic mushrooms and legalise them for therapeutic use. And most notably, the American Food and Drug Administration has publicly come out and described psilocybin as a breakthrough therapy for depression. And in Canada, the government has also acknowledged the medicinal benefits of psilocybin by allowing it to be used therapeutically for patients with terminal illnesses. Not surprisingly, Scotland and the UK as a whole are lagging way behind. Scientists at Imperial College and King's College have been producing very exciting research which shows the effectiveness of psilocybin in dealing with mental health issues, particularly depression. But in order for this to progress towards becoming a viable treatment for the public,
Psilocybin has to be analysed in bigger scale studies, and this is not possible at the moment due to red tape. The red tape being that it is still classified as a Schedule 1 drug. Researchers have been left frustrated, and campaigners such as the Conservative Drug Reform Policy Group have been pushing hard for psilocybin to be reclassified for research purposes only, in the hope that one day patients can get access to a natural, effective mental health treatment.
Here we can see the magnitude of the effect that we're seeing with psilocybin so far. Psilocybin shown in blue, and you can see the data at 2 weeks post-treatment and 3 months post-treatment. Now I should caution that it's early days yet. We had 12 patients in the trial at this stage. We now actually have more data and the effects look even better. But even so, there were several hundred patients in these other studies. Also, all of our patients knew that they were going to receive psilocybin, whereas these other studies had a placebo control element. That's actually what we're going to be doing next. Even so, with these caveats entered, you can see that the magnitude of the effect that we're seeing so far is pretty considerable, even at the 3-month post-treatment period, where they haven't received any treatments from us for that duration of time. Also remember that our patients had treatment-resistant depression. Many of our patients reported having had their depression for most of their adult lives. The average duration of the illness in this sample was 18 years, and yet all of them showed some improvement in their depressive symptoms for at least 3 weeks after the treatment. Some 2/3, 67% met criteria for remission. 1 week post-treatment, remission means they're essentially depression-free. And 42% maintain that status of being depression-free for 3 months after the treatment. So to finish, I'm just going to read you a short case report written by one of the patients in our trial. He's male, age 52, has a very long history of depression, quite severe depression, stretching back to his 20s. He's tried a number of different medications, all of which haven't worked for him, and also psychotherapy. So about his baseline state before the treatment, he says the following: "For decades, I've battled depression, the awful feeling that you don't matter, you're not making a difference, that everyone else is having a better life, the utter pointlessness of it all, getting no real enjoyment from anything." Then about the experience, he says, "There simply aren't words to describe it, but I can say that the usual negative self-narration that I have had vanished completely. It was replaced by a sense of beautiful chaos, a landscape of unimaginable color and beauty. I began to see that all of my concerns about daily living weren't relevant, that they were a result of a negative spiral. I also felt like I was learning without being taught, that intuition was being fed. And fleeting feelings from my past came back, memories too, both of which had seemed long forgotten." Then about the outcome, this was written a couple of weeks after he'd completed the trial. He says, "Although it's early days yet, the results are amazing. I feel more confident and calm than I have in such a long time. My outlook has changed significantly too. I'm more aware that it's pointless to get wrapped up in endless negativity. I also feel as if I've seen a much clearer picture. Another side to this is that I feel like I've had a second chance, like a survivor. I can enjoy things now the way I used to, without the cynicism, without the oppression. At its most basic, I feel like I used to before the depression."
Paul Philippe struggled through every day as an adult, turning to alcohol to numb his pain. Doctors simply diagnosed severe mental health issues and drugged him up to the eyeballs with medications. Paul couldn't hold down a job, he was sleeping in his car, and he was drinking himself into an early grave. But he always had a glimmer of hope.
I ended up going into a government detox facility it was like a 10-day stay. And I used that as like a foundation where I knew I was sort of safe because I couldn't get to alcohol. because I knew it was doing me really bad things, you know, and there's still that part of me inside that was like, nah, don't give up, man, this is going to turn out all right, you know. And so I did that 10 days, and I come out, and, you know, well, that's nearly, so in like 2 weeks, that'll be 7 years since I've had a drink. But after coming out of the detox, and I went to see a psychiatrist, and was sort of labelled with, you know, extreme bipolar disorder and depression, and possibly, you know, BPD, like borderline personality disorder. And the answer for that was just to prescribe me a ton of drugs. You know, there were antidepressants, there were antipsychotics, there was, you know, like Valiums and relaxants and stuff like that. And, okay, that helped me stay off the alcohol. But what happened, or how those antipsychotics affected me, was when I'd take it, it would knock me out within half an hour to an hour. And I'd go off into these really crazy, vivid dream worlds. And it got to the point on those antipsychotic medications where the dream worlds become far more real than my waking life. So really all I wanted to do when I was awake was go back into that dream world. So I'd come straight home from work, bang, pop a pill at like, you know, 5 o'clock and pass out, and, you know, go back into my dream world. And quite often I'd wake up, I'd ring work, tell them I'm not coming in, you know, which felt like a dream, hang up, and then go back in, you know. And so that sort of went on, and those pills become my safety blanket. And, you know, I mean, I was working. I wouldn't say I was being the greatest father, because I was pretty, you know, pretty out of it with all of these prescription medications, which society says is legal, you know, which doctors have become the peddlers of, you know, feeling that they're doing the right thing, but these things aren't answers, you know, they're short-term solutions. Not once did my doctor say to me, oh, look, Paul, we've got you on all of these things, but are you going to speak to anyone? Are you seeking any counselling? Are you eating healthy? Are you exercising? You know, what else are you doing? Because this isn't the answer. He just wanted to up my dose. You know, I'd go and see him every month. He just wanted to up my dose.
And you were an adult who was just completely emotionally dysfunctional because you never got the emotional nurturing and love as a child.
Yeah. And those, you know, that programming or those messaging in my head, that stayed with me, you know, so it wouldn't take anything big to go wrong. You know, it could be something very small. And in my head, I'd be like, oh, fuck it, I'm just a fucking idiot. I don't want to be alive anyway. I hate being alive. I hate myself, you know, and that was the constant, you know, like skipping back a bit, like when I was a teenager and, you know, into my early 20s, the way I kept myself going was saying, oh, it's okay, I'll kill myself in 6 months. So let's just live this 6 months and have fun. Don't worry, we're gonna die in 6 months. It's okay. And then I'd get to that 6 month period and I'd be like, oh, okay, well, we'll extend it by another 3 months. All right, I'll kill myself in 3 months. So let's just get through this, you know. And that was almost the strategy of how I kept myself going and how I kept myself alive. And you know, it was just crazy. Like, I wasn't living, I was surviving. I wouldn't even say existing. I was just surviving every day. That's all it was just to get up and make it till it was time to go to bed again, you know.
So I took myself off to Peru and went into the Amazon rainforest and worked with the shamans, like the real deal. These guys have got, you know, their father was a shaman, their father's father, their father's father, you know, it's in their blood. They spend just years of their life. It's a calling for them. And worked with them and really felt like something shifted. Like they really managed to draw out. I remember all the black stuff leaving my body. So that's another whole story, but I came back and I felt like my hard drive had been wiped.
You found plant medicines, and I suppose you found one of the most powerful plant medicines that's out there, ayahuasca. But you've come home, and then you've then went on a journey with psilocybin mushrooms. So tell us about that, and then tell us about the benefits that you've felt in your life since you began this work.
So when I came back, I was really quite interested in shamanism then. I was like, what's it all about? And realised that it's kind of one of the oldest, I don't know if you could call it religion, but all over the world. I mean, there's Siberian shamans, there's African shamans. It's because it's linked to nature, it's linked to the seasons, it's linked with the plants and the animals, with the planet, with the rocks and the trees. And I just thought, okay, so we must have had that in Scotland then. What was that? And what were our plant medicines? And then I realised, they were the mushrooms. And so that's on our native land. We had that knowledge about how to work with them. So I started getting really interested in that. Because that's our culture. And also realising that although mushrooms get called plant medicines, they're not plants. Like, the classification of everything is into 3 kingdoms. There's the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the fungi. And the mushrooms are fungi. And I think that as humans, we haven't even scratched the surface yet of what fungi can do in sort of medicinal terms and teaching us. And, there's a lot to learn from fungi. And so they're a bit different, the mushrooms. So eventually I managed to make contact with them and start learning from them, and also kind of realised that we did have a lot of knowledge in this country at some point. We did have people who worked with plants, and going back through human history, something that was really interesting that I heard of as well, that was, people came from Africa. We all came from Africa, and then we headed north through Europe. And that some people think that there's a stage of human evolution, which was when humans found the psychedelic plant medicines, and it raised their consciousness and took us to a different place from all the rest of the animals. And there's cave paintings with mushrooms on them and psychedelic experiences in them. So, I don't know if that's what happened, but it's an interesting thing to read about, so that they've got a lot to teach us. And that there's a big resurgence in interest in them now. And, who knows, maybe that's our next evolutionary leap, is that, getting in touch with something that's a bigger, like they say in AA, is a higher power, or there's many different words for it in all the different religions. But when you get down to the bottom of all different religions, they all seem to come to the same place, that there's something bigger than us, and that we can make contact with it.
So psychedelics allow the unconscious mind to become conscious. Important material that has been built up over the course of life, but that has been pushed out of sight where you can't see it, emerges. It's kind of crumpled clothes that you push to the back of your wardrobe, and it emerges, it comes out. You don't just see it, you embody it. Memories, emotions, pain, love, grief, whatever has been hidden emerges and demands you feel it. It can be incredibly painful and incredibly beautiful. Patients in our study described overall having 3 main types of experience. So firstly, visiting past traumas. Secondly, having insights about your life, negative patterns and how to change them. And thirdly, these experiences of harmony and connection and unity. And sometimes they would have all 3 experiences in the course of one dosing session. Patients described going from being emotionally locked up inside to being emotionally liberated. They described going from being avoidant of emotion to accepting emotion. So they talked about how in depression, when stressful or painful things happened, emotions were distanced or suppressed. Our society doesn't really value suffering. It's seen as a weakness. So they'd learned to put their feelings in boxes. Sam remembered growing up and being told, boys don't cry, so he learned to suffer in silence. And many of the patients they couldn't deal with their feelings because so much had happened in their lives. They had so many years of hurt. They just didn't have the resources to face it all. And they had many different ways of avoiding their pain, self-medicating through food, through television, through painkillers and then often through antidepressants, which didn't really work on the root causes of their suffering, just numbed the worst of the pain.
With Paul's first psilocybin experience, he took a large dose of mushrooms and admitted he was intending on taking them to escape his own mind and his troubles temporarily. But what awaited him was a deep spiritual experience that he didn't expect, and healing on a level that he could never have imagined.
I was just looking for an escapism, a good way to get away from myself. And I sat down, and all of a sudden my grandmother appeared. You know, my grandmother had been dead by this stage for 25 odd years, you know, and we started to have this big, deep conversation about life and about, you know, my life. And, you know, I was shown what seemed to be a journey of a couple of hundred years back down the bloodline to explain to me how trauma worked, you know, how it was continuing cycles that passed through, that passed through, that passed through, that almost the starting point was unknown, probably irrelevant in a sense where it started, but it was just explaining how these things pass through. And, you know, my grandmother was explaining that my mum had to be the way she was, you know, to be the womb that was going to bring me through. And, you know, this conversation went on for quite a while. And then, you know, my grandmother said, "Do you want to speak to your mother?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so I had this conversation with my mother. Now, mind you, I could see them in the same way I would see a person I was talking to on the street. It was solid. It wasn't wispy. It was completely solid. I was with them. I was standing with them, having these discussions. And I spoke with my mum, and, you know, in the duration of that conversation, I forgave my mum for everything, because I finally saw her as just as much of a victim as I believed that I had been. And I saw her trauma, and I saw where her behaviours, where all of that come from, you know. And yeah, it was quite profound. It was a big release, because I guess something that, you know, was sort of explained to me recently was that this is almost another trap that we can get caught in, because when we don't forgive, you know, abusers, especially when they're a parent, we can never forgive ourselves, because there's a part of us deep down, I mean, we'll call it the subconscious, that knows that we are half of them. Half of who we are is the mother. Half of who we are is the father. So when we're not forgiving, well, in my case, when I wasn't forgiving my mother, I wasn't forgiving myself. And I was the only physical connection. I was the only physical aspect of her that was still around now. So I was how I got back at her, because if I did things to myself or made myself suffer, that was paying her back, because she wasn't here, you know, to go through it. So for the mushroom, the intelligence that sits inside the mushroom, however that comes through, whatever way that is. So the mushroom presented itself as a grandmotherly energy. And so after I've had this experience, you know, with talking with my grandmother and talking with my mum and having that forgiveness, you know, I was having a conversation with the intelligence of the mushroom, and it said to me, it goes, "From now on, you will never, your biggest issue that's holding you back is your suicidal thoughts and your self-hatred. And tonight, that's gone. It's never going to come back. We're getting rid of that for good." And I guess I was slightly skeptical at that statement. You know, 40 years, or I think it was 39 years, you know, and however many of those years as consciously having those thoughts. to be gone. And, you know, the intelligence was saying to me that we're going to get rid of that. You're never going to have to deal with that again. But now the hard part is you're going to have to learn how to live, because you've been surviving your whole life. You've been existing. You've just been surviving. You've never been living. So we're going to take that weight off your shoulders. But now comes almost another harder step. You know, you got to learn how to live. You got to learn how to be who you want to be. And from that night, bar once, maybe 3 weeks after that experience, something happened, and I almost started to go into that, oh, I don't want to fucking be here, blah, blah, blah. And that intelligence of the mushroom kicked back in again. And in a loving and caring way, but with a very gentle ridicule, it sort of went, oh, Diddums, what's wrong? Why are we going back here? Is it really that bad what's just happened that's led you to this? Is this, you know, and I laughed it off. And that's it. That's gone. You know, that's never been back. It's 4.5 years now, you know, and from that night, pretty much, I went off all of the pharmaceuticals that I'd been put on. And I've never had a suicidal thought again.
Yeah, so I started to realise that the place to look for answers wasn't outside in material things, it was actually inside me. And that's where to look for answers. What I've learned from working with mushrooms is about, you know, something comes through our body, and in the West we're very much in our heads. Our bodies are kind of like something that just walks our heads around, and we just spend a lot of time in our thinking brain at the front here. But there's a lot more going on, and there's a lot more that we can contact through our body. Yeah, so getting more interested in today, like, why are so many of us depressed? Why are we all suffering from anxiety? What's that all about? And it seems like, and people have said to me, oh, I'd like to try plant medicines, but I'm scared. And what we're scared of is we kind of know about that dark stuff, that black stuff that we've got. Like, most of us have got it, and people think, I'm going to take the mushrooms and it's going to come up and I'm just not going to be able to handle it. It's going to be horrific. And so, yeah, people have said I'm scared to do it. So I've actually started working now as a psychedelic integration coach. So what I do is help people before their experience to learn how to handle that. Like when the fear comes up, when sort of some people call it the feels, the emotions, you know, when you're triggered by something, and we all know what it feels like. Something happens and then your adrenaline rises and your breath goes really shallow and your heart starts pounding and you can't think straight. And so that's all that stuff that's coming up. And mostly what we do now, because we've got a lot of chronic instances of that happening in our lives, mostly what we do now is we just try and push it down as fast as we can. You know, we have a drink, or we go and eat some biscuits, or we, you know, go on social media and just scroll and scroll and scroll to keep our heads from thinking about any of this scary stuff that's coming up. But what the plant medicines do is help you to just kind of switch off this frontal part of your brain, which is where all the thinking is, where all the stories are, and get down further into your kind of limbic brain, which is in the middle of your head, and into your primal brain, your brainstem, which is where your kind of animal brain is. And that's where all this trauma is stored that comes up. And kind of the neural networks from that come up to the present day. And so you're doing something that seems fairly innocuous and you get triggered by it because it's linked back down to something that was wired quite young when you were a kid. So yeah, so these trauma responses that we have that are generally, like I believe now, and I've spoken to quite a few people that say they come from things that happened to us when we were children. Because when you're a kid, like, so trauma is something that you perceive as life-threatening. So two people could be in the same situation and one will have a trauma response because they perceived it as life-threatening, and the other one might have thought it was exciting and, you know, they get a thrill out of it. But when we're kids, we don't have all the information that we have as adults. So something really, that might have been insignificant to somebody else was really quite traumatic for us as a child. And so we end up putting this thing and this thing together, and we have a neural pathway that goes from quite deep in our system up to our frontal brain here. So as adults, something could happen to us, and it triggers that off, and we don't really understand why. So I think what the plant medicines can do, and you can do this in any way. I've done it with hypnosis, I've done it with breath work, about letting difficult feelings come up and then discovering where they came from, and then going back down and kind of clarifying what it was and making a new neural pathway back up to the present day again, so that you start using that one, so that you're not scared of spiders anymore, or you're not scared of flying anymore, because you've just degraded the neural pathway that was there and you've put a new one in. So what plant medicines can do is, it's a bit like all of these neural pathways are like sledging slopes. Like we've just had snow in Scotland, so after people have been there for a while, there's the same paths that go down through the snow, and they just go, it's subconscious. We don't even know that we're doing these habitual patterns. And so the plant medicine is kind of like a fresh fall of snow. It sort of covers over all of our conditioning and our neural pathways. And after that, we've got a chance to do things in a fresh way. And it also really like blanks off this thinking part of your brain, and it goes into the feeling part and the subconscious part. And it can take, my experience and other people's as well, is that it can take you right back down into these traumatic experiences that you had in childhood. And you can see them with more perspective. You can see them with an adult perspective, and you can understand more about what happened. So then when you come back into your outer world again, you've got an opportunity to put a new neural pathway in, to say, well, I don't have to do things like that. I can understand why that happened to me. And it's like fresh snow, and you can put your sledge down a different way.
And then the journeys after that night with the mushrooms it become like a counsellor, a parent, a confidant, a best friend, all rolled into one. And there was so many in-depth conversations, with the intelligence of the mushroom, about, and I remember one of the most powerful things it used to say to me was, well, I'm not judging you. I don't judge you for what you want to do. I don't judge you for who you're going to be. But what do you want to be? I don't see anything you do as right or wrong, But how do you feel about it? Does it feel good to you? If it feels good to you and you're okay with it, then that's how you should be. If it doesn't feel good, without judgment, change it. Let it go. One of the things that really helped me change so much was, both with the help of the mushroom and not on the mushroom, was doing a lot of walking out in nature. I'd come home from work, I'd go in the house, chuck my backpack on with some water and some snacks, and I'd go, on average I was doing like 20, 25 Ks a night after work, of just walking through nature and just looking at all my belief structures, looking at all of these frameworks, looking at all of these underlying programming that made me who I am, and evaluating it and being like, nah, that's got to go. That's got to go. Oh, that can stay. Let's change this. Let's change that. Like rewriting the data, like rewriting the operating system that is Paul, that is me, like going into the deep levels and understanding so many things. And I guess one of the most powerful things that I found during that is sometimes just understanding where a behavior come from, or an event that triggered it, or repetitive events that triggered that behavior, that was enough to get rid of it. Like, once I understood where it come from and what the cause was, then it was like it lost its power, because it wasn't an unknown force, inside me that was driving me to these things. It become, a known factor. So I was able to get rid of a lot of that. And then I'd been away for work, so I'd been straight and sober, like, not having mushrooms, not having smoking any weed or anything like that. For about 3 weeks, I'd been away for work and interstate, and I was driving back and stopped at this cheap little motel halfway between New South Wales and Victoria, and went to sleep and had the most profound dream where I was just in like this sea of gold, and this one statement kept repeating, which was, "You are the one that you've been waiting for. You're the one that you've been waiting for." And I woke up and it hit me, you know, that feeling that most of us have, that there's someone out there, that there's someone that's coming to save us, that there's someone that's going to come and make our life better, that there's someone out there who cares for us deeply and is going to protect us. It's us. It was me. It was me all along. I was the one all my life. You know, those moments of hope that I saw as a child, those moments as a teenager, those moments in my 20s when I was like so depressed, you know, and I even look back at my writing and it was dark and it was death. And then there'd be like these 2 or 3 paragraphs that had come in and it'd be like, "It's beautiful, life is beautiful, don't worry, everything's going to be fine." It was me now.
Sina Maria is a woman based in California who works with plant medicines. Sina talks about this on her YouTube channel, and she also teaches people in online webinars about microdosing psilocybin mushrooms. Here she tells us what microdosing is all about.
So microdosing is essentially taking a subperceptual amount of a conscious altering substance. And a very common one that people work with is psilocybin. And the key is doing it consistently. So you could do like 3 to 5 days on and 2 days off. And I love it. I think it's so powerful because it's integratable and it's more accessible for people that might be scared to work with larger doses of plant medicine. This is a way to kind of ease into it. And when you take it, it should be a low enough dose that you can go about your day. You don't have to cancel your plans. You can work and do your daily life, and you also get the benefits of working with a really powerful plant medicine like psilocybin.
How long have you been microdosing for, and what sort of health benefits have you experienced?
Yeah, I've been doing it on and off for 2 years. When I first started doing it, I did it for about 3 months pretty straight, like did the protocol of 3 to 5 days on, 2 days off. And oh man, one of the biggest benefits I've noticed is my cognition, my memory, my ability to create and find creative solutions. And I think underneath all that, there's a level of emotional support that I've received, where I feel more hopeful. I feel like I have the moment where I can remember that I get to choose my perspective about things. And so I can shift my perspective into finding something to be grateful for or view something as an opportunity, whereas before I would have seen it as a challenge. And I feel more connected to myself, more connected to people around me, more connected to nature, and more connected to my purpose too. So before I found the plant medicine world, I was pretty anxious. I was pretty depressed. I was really disconnected, and I didn't know that I was disconnected. But I drank a lot. I grew up, I binge drank and partied really hard for over 10 years, starting really young in high school till I was about 25. And finding plant medicine was really the thing that helped me get out of that cycle. And it, for example, psilocybin, it works in the serotonin pathways. And so it is a natural antidepressant. And I've never been diagnosed with depression, but I think it's a really common experience for most humans to experience depression throughout their lives, especially given the state of the world and kind of the crazy things that are happening. And so when I started working with plant medicines, especially psilocybin regularly, I realized that I felt so much lighter, and I felt like my inner world started to expand and blossom. Whereas before I was really, just kind of sucked into the world around me, and I didn't really have a sense of myself. The main things I teach is that, you know, like psilocybin, it's a mushroom that grows from the earth, and that's the magic that I feel with plant medicines in general. Is they're already here, they're already created. And so of course we do have amazing options in Western medicine, and they're needed at different times, but I encourage people to open to the world of plant medicine. And I think microdosing is a really helpful way to do that, because it helps you connect to Earth's intelligence. It helps you connect to the natural world around us. And there's so much healing right outside our doors that we sometimes forget about or get lost from. And oh man, the benefits, there's endless benefits from people that have learned about microdosing, that they've mentioned to me. I think the most powerful ones that I've received are people sharing that they've stopped drinking or stopped smoking tobacco. There's also studies going on showing that psilocybin can be effective for stopping addictive behaviors. Another one is people have also transitioned off of pharmaceutical antidepressants that they've been on for 10 years or more, and they've titrated down and started working with microdosing, and it's changed their life. They feel much more alive. And I think another big benefit that's been coming up is people mentioning that they feel a sense of hope. They feel more connected to consciousness, like they feel their consciousness expanding, and they also feel more hopeful and have more faith and more trust in the world and what's unfolding, which I think is really important right now.
I do suggest to people the idea of more microdosing these days. Yeah. You know, yeah. Because I do believe that there is a strong power in that, and some people I've suggested that to who have started to microdose mushrooms have gone off their pharmaceuticals, have, you know, either drastically reduced or quit their drinking altogether, and then sustain that. You know, it's not a case of you eat magic mushrooms, you know, and you feel good for 2 weeks and then you do a big dive. You know, it's a sustained, ongoing feeling, you know. And it's been amazing because, you know, I think of one person in particular, and she had, you know, was being prescribed pharmaceuticals quite intensely from the time she was a teenager, and, you know, big drinking and other addictions and stuff like that. And then, you know, started microdosing mushrooms and found that, you know, it made things a lot easier to deal with. And with a sort of microdosing regime, from my experience and what I've seen with people, there's a set duration to it. It's not, you now will be on microdoses of mushrooms for the rest of your life, you know, which is the sort of standard procedure, it seems, with the pharmaceuticals that we get prescribed. It's almost like, you know, you can do an 8-week, you can do a 12-week duration. You know, maybe some people like myself, you know, it was a few years of process with the mushrooms. But there's an end point.
If there's anyone out there watching this who maybe has the idea in their head, like a lot of society has, that these are drugs, psilocybin mushrooms are drugs, what would your response be to that?
But mushrooms are something that nature's produced. It doesn't need to go into a lab. It doesn't get cooked up in backyards. It's not, you know, it's nothing like that. It's a natural product that's being used by humans for thousands of years, you know, and psilocybin, from my understanding, the compound of psilocybin is, you know, like one twist or something on the molecule from being serotonin, something that's naturally inside of our brain. And if someone takes something that profoundly changes them and makes them into a better member of society, makes them into a more loving person, makes them into a more open person, makes them into a person who wants to be at their best, what's wrong with that? Like, you know, like I saw a stat yesterday that 1 in 25 deaths on this planet are the direct result of alcohol. 1 in 25. You know, how many deaths out there on records are related to mushrooms? You know, I'm not going to say that there hasn't been involved in any at all, but you know, this is something that people accept in society. You know, and if your mate's upset, it's common to say, "Oh, it's all right, mate. Let's go and have a drink." You know, or people can say, "Oh, I got so drunk last night, I passed out in my bed and threw up all over myself," and people are like, "Ha ha ha ha." You know, like there's a profound sort of shift in mentality, you know, that needs to happen. You know, alcohol is accepted and, you know, is like a social norm. Yet here's a natural healing medicine that can be so profound in changing a person's life. They're working with people at Johns Hopkins who are at end of life, who have responded to nothing else. And then they give them a mushroom experience. And these are people who are dying, like right on the edge, waiting to die, which is like one of the biggest fears of most people. And yet they have this one profound experience and they go to that with peace. The most fearful thing that most humans will face is the thought of dying. And yet these people have these experiences with the mushroom that then allow them to face that with peace, you know, with acceptance. Yeah. I mean, it's hard not to, I see it as hard not to allow people to be able to take something that's natural like that, you know, and allow the changes. I don't think everyone should just run off and pick massive amounts of them and just, you know, start eating. Like anything like that, things need to be gone into with thought and intention, and, you know, setting can be very important, and trust.
And there's quite a period after the psilocybin experience where you've got your fresh snow, you can do things differently before you go back to your old patterns again. And that's one of the reasons that I think that having a guide, having the integration coaching that I do, because you're in a very good place for making changes right afterwards, but sometimes it's difficult to know what the pearls were that you found for the experience and then how you relate that into your outer life. Like, what does that mean for your relationships, for the way you behave, for what you want to do? If you're in a job that you don't like, what do you want to do instead? And making changes, because it's difficult our system loves to just do the same thing over and over again, and so making changes can be quite tricky. But if it comes from that place where you've done a bit of rewiring, it's so much easier. People can still go to other countries. I mean, Holland is very well set up. There's lots of really good treatment centres there with people who know how to guide. And I think that's another thing I would say about plant medicines, that in cultures that have used them for years, they wouldn't dream of using them without a guide, without somebody to help, someone who knows how they operate and knows how to support you. Because it's I think people do need that support and need that help afterwards to make sense of what they've learned. So you can go to places in other countries where it is legal and they know how to do it and they've been working with it for years, just not in the UK at the moment. But there's plenty you can research on the internet and find out. You can definitely educate yourself around it. So when I went on my search for meaning, at first I felt a bit guilty. I was like, everybody else is just getting on with it. How are they managing? And is this a good thing to be spending my time doing? But now I think it's the only thing to be spending my time doing. I don't know why everybody's not doing it. And actually over lockdown, when people have had time to stop and think and reflect, I think a lot more people are doing it now. A lot more people are going, why are we living like this? It's crazy, all the stress and the busyness. Like, why?
It's just been, the most beautiful journey. There's not one thing, there's not one aspect, any event in my life that I would change. Not one of them. Not the most painful, hurtful moments at all. Because every one of those went to make me who I am now. Every one of those led up to these experiences to give me an understanding of life, of this world we live in, of this most beautiful gift that we get to experience. It's that healing now as an adult that I have to go back to my little Paul, you know, that little kid that was suffering, and to be able to go, it's all right, man. You know, I love you. You're awesome. You're going to make it through this. It's okay. It's all, the juice is worth the squeeze. Like everything you're going through now, these are gifts that you're going to be able to unwrap. They hurt now, you know, and I look at some of the gifts that I've gotten out of these experiences, which is compassion, insight, understanding, love. I was always scared, like in the back of my mind, when people would be my friends or people would show some love towards me, I'm like, oh shit, you know, they won't feel like that when they find out who I am, you know, and like I was dirty, like there was something wrong with me, like I was stained, and that when people would find out what I'd been through as a child and in my life, that they'd hate me for it, like, oh, if your mother couldn't love you, well, why would we, you know? And then that all changed, you know, with the mushroom. It was realizing that, I guess it was one of my walks in nature, you know, and I'd look at these trees that were just beautiful, and I'd look at these skies that were beautiful, and I'd look at the, you know, the insects, all of this stuff that I just thought was so beautiful. And the mushroom said to me, it's like, that's your reflection. That's your beauty. That's how beautiful you are. And you have to make a decision in this moment, right now. You either realize that you're as beautiful as all of those things are, and as worthy as love as all of those things are, or you're saying that all of those things are ugly, that all of those things don't deserve love, because they're a reflection of you. That's a reflection of your own beauty. That's your reflection of your own deserving of love.